Well, thanks for tuning into Talking Point. I'm your host, Neeraj Shah. It's not very often that we get somebody who's managing money and has oodles of experience within space as well as a specialist. I know all investors can become specialists by spending years, but for an investor in the healthcare space to also have a degree backing that is not too often. Now, our guest today, and this is the first time that we're getting him on Talking Points. For the few of you who might not know about him, let me just try and read up a bit about Dr. Amit Varma. He's the managing partner of Quadria Capital. As the website suggests, he's got over 20 years of investment, operational, and clinical experience in the healthcare sector, and is a renowned physician with healthcare management leadership. He's led the international expansion initiatives of Fortis and affiliated companies, and well, I'm guessing plays a pivotal role in managing all the money that Quadria Capital, or investing all the money that Quadria Capital manages as well. Let's get him on the show today to talk about his sense of how does he see the healthcare space doing within the country and within the space at large. Dr. Varma, good having you. Thanks much for joining in. Hope all is safe.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for the kind words.
No, not at all. So I'm just wondering, how do you, a bird's eye view of how do you see the space developing? Because, I mean, we look at it from an India perspective, and everybody calls India as this pharma capital of the world, or the pharma manufacturing place, hub of the world. How do you see India and the Southeast Asian space? Because I reckon that's where you seem to find favor currently.
Yes, if you don't mind, I'll give you a slightly roundabout answer because it's very important for you to get perspective of how we got into the space. About 20 years ago, decided to make the shift from the United States to India and Asia, along with my partner Abrar. We come from diametrically opposite backgrounds. He's a healthcare investment banker. I am a clinician who pretends to understand business. We decided to join hands, base ourselves out of Singapore to invest money in India and the ASEAN. Logic was very simple, and I want to leave you with a statistic. The US and Europe together spend about $3 trillion in US health in healthcare today. And by 2025, we will be spending in this part of the world 4.5 trillion US dollars. So that is the scope of how much money is going to get spent in healthcare. The second thing, which is very important, which most people don't talk about, is that healthcare and education are core infrastructure. And there is no government that I know in this region which spends enough of GDP on healthcare and education. Healthcare is a fundamental. And unfortunately, what COVID taught us this time around is that healthcare and economics cannot be separated. So our lack of having spent in India for the past 60, 70 years enough money on public health has led to this kind of a crisis. Now, what is going to happen is that we need to spend almost 300 billion US in healthcare over the next 5 years. If I take the current government spend, that is going to be about 100, 120. So the remaining amount has to come from private healthcare. And that's how we believe that healthcare will be at the forefront. The last point that I wanted to make was that we are suffering an epidemic of what we in medical terms call chronic diseases, or NCCDs, chronic non-communicable diseases. Once upon a time in my good old youthful days, when I was practicing, you had an infection, I gave you an antibiotic, you went back, you got better, and in 7 days, you went back to your normal productive self. What is happening is, when I talk about chronic diseases, is that we in this region are suffering from an epidemic of diabetes, hypertension, kidney diseases, and even cancer. What does that imply? If I am a diabetic, I am going to be a diabetic for life. I need now an ecosystem of doctors, infrastructure, insulin, testing. Just think of the spend that I as a patient have to make for the rest of my life. 70% of my patients across the region still pay out of pocket. Healthcare is the single most common reason to go into debt in India today. Think about the enormity of the problem. And then we talk about the fact that healthcare is an attractive space to invest. Yeah, we believe so. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers that you put out are staggering. I also somebody who runs a pharma fund also giving the statistic that just the number of old people that will be coming into the fold every year just lead to the quantum of a demand for healthcare services and or pharma and healthcare services allied over the next few years. And they talk about at least a 15-20% CAGR for almost all well-managed companies in this space. I'm just trying to get a sense from you about uh, as difficult a period it is from a country's uh, socio-capital perspective. It seems to be as large an opportunity from somebody who's looking to run successful business in this space then across spheres.
Yeah, the cost of sounding commercial and crass, let me just say that the COVID pandemic should be viewed as an opportunity to stabilize the sector and actually put money to work where it's most needed. Let's just face facts. From every parameter, number of hospital beds, number of doctors, number of nurses, number of tests that we do, India today is at sub-Saharan levels. So when we benchmark ourselves to WHO numbers, we are below those targets. So we cut through the rhetoric and the hype, cut through the fact that we can do heart transplants and liver transplants at much cheaper and better quality in anywhere in the world when we do it in India. The fact of the matter is that huge blocks of our population don't even get basic care. My view in this is very simple. This is an inflection point where we should use this pandemic as an opportunity to change the way we deliver medicine. I want to stand on a pulpit and make a comment. What has happened is that the private sector has been doing its own tertiary and quaternary care stuff. We've left the government to do the public and the primary healthcare. What COVID taught us is you need to get together. Nobody can survive on their own. At the end of the day, what should I be focusing on? When I look at healthcare opportunities, yes, it's the APIs, get into formulation, build up hospitals. But what I'm most excited about now is how can I be part of the preventive healthcare system? How can I be part of digitization of healthcare? How can I use artificial intelligence to get to the rural and the semi-urban opportunities? How do I consolidate the thousands and thousands of nursing homes and standalone hospitals and bring them on one platform? How do I make my supply chain more efficient? As we saw right at the beginning of the pandemic, even getting gloves or PPEs across was an issue. So start thinking about point of care diagnostics. I can reel out various subsectors of healthcare which are demanding this kind of investment. So yes, it's a massive opportunity.
Okay, just one quick follow-up to the earlier answer and the statistics that you gave me about the quantum of spend that is required and the quantum of spend that the government will do, and then therefore the remainder that the private sector has to do. How do you envisage as an investor, how do you envisage the private sector will step up to do these investments? And how would you as an investor, purely as an investor, approach these investments? So in some of these might be profitable, some of these might come under some bit of government control, etc. So how do you pick and choose?
So Neeraj, one of the things that I do want to highlight is that there are a lot of people, I believe, make a mistake. And as an investor, you never make money on trends. You make money by investing in businesses. So whether it is healthcare or any other sector, the fundamental of business does not change. So that's point one. So just throwing money at healthcare is not going to generate money. Point two is that unfortunately, this is also a very domain specific industry. You need to understand what you have to do in pharma or even running a hospital. It's a very complex animal. And then third, and I can afford to make this comment, you're dealing with the people like doctors who are reasonably intelligent, extremely smart on what they want. And it becomes the whole manpower side of it is extremely, extremely difficult. Having said that, our belief continues to be that healthcare will grow at a 15 to 17% CAGR, regardless of which part of healthcare you're in. As long as you have a reasonable management and you are in a space and you don't mess it up by trying to do overly ambitious things, we can grow. Here, where we need help from the government is that, and I think personally, we have done a very poor job in the healthcare industry of working with the government because we've allowed the government to step into our space of telling us what to do. I think there needs to be a far more robust interaction between the private sector and the public sector to reach a common platform. So just to give you an example, to me, we keep talking about digital healthcare. The government has its own agenda. It's coming up with its own apps. It's talking about a universal health ID. The private sector is waiting for this to happen. What I don't understand is why we can't get together and agree on what this common universal health ID should look like. Because if it is a health ID that I can use in my private hospitals and can simultaneously be used across the public sector, that would be perfect. Why do we need to go out and create our own modalities? And if we can make that work at the back end and address the privacy concerns, which a lot of people keep talking about, I think that's the way needs to get done. So
So
there
why is
are
it not done?
various touch points. I think at this point of time, a lot of times what happens is that, and again, I want to take blame on the private side, is occasionally we are not as unified as we should be. And there's a lot of crosstalk that takes place. Um, um, I don't think by design, it's just by default. And we probably need a more unified approach on how we engage with the government and the bureaucracy. But at the end of the day, the intent is correct. I mean, nobody in the private sector assumes to imagine crass commercialism without worrying about the effect that they're going to have on society. And the government has the same thing. I don't think the government believes that every single private operator is basically out to make money and doesn't care about the patient. So it's just a matter of bringing this together.
Okay. Let me rephrase my question, or not rephrase it, but put it in another way. So let's assume that the CAGR growth rate would be 15, 17 odd percent within all the constraints that we have. And if these kind of become better, then maybe things could improve as well and become better for the patient, let's assume. But working with the assumption of 15, 17% CAGR, surely the input-output ratio uh, across different verticals of healthcare might be different too. I mean, manufacturing companies, but catering largely to the US market versus manufacturing companies catering to domestic market, healthcare service providers, allied spaces, etc. All of these, the return ratios, the kind of growth opportunity is different. Where do you believe, would you want to, or maybe would you believe that investors at large would probably have a larger chance of capital growth over the course of the next decade? I understand you can't, and I wouldn't want to ask you about ek saal mein kya hoga, but let's look at a decade because that's how I presume you would be looking at things. How would you look at it?
So let me give you the Quadria perspective. Number one, our horizon is always 5 to 7 years. We believe that's the horizon we should be learning. 10 years is too long. Obviously, 1 to 3 years in healthcare is an oxymoron. That's one. Number two, we believe fundamentally that healthcare is local. There is no patient who's willing or does it deliberately wants to go 500 kilometers across the country to go get treated. If they want a test, then they want to be done at home. If they want drugs delivered, they want to be done at home. So the whole market has to be viewed from the fact that it needs to be now looking at not creating meccas of excellence in large metropolitan cities, but how do you deliver healthcare at site? Number two. The third fundamental that Quadria we believe in is that it is a volume game. At the end of the day, unfortunately, 1.3 billion people, we are never going to run short of patients. We may run short of patients who can afford to pay for quality of care. So the whole system of whatever business we set up, whether it's in the delivery space, diagnostic space, even on pharma, is to deliver large volumes of high quality care at the least possible price, period. And that can easily be done when you're looking at the large amounts of patients that we are going to create. I'll give you an example. AIG Hospitals in Hyderabad, one of our investee companies, they cater to 2,000 outpatients a day. They do close to 200 to 300 endoscopies a day. That makes them the single largest gastric hospital in the world. We deliver this kind of a care. We deliver the doctors, the diagnostics, and the testing at a total of $10 to the patient. Why is that happening? Using the same machines, the same Olympus endoscopes, the same kind of doctors who are probably doyens in their field. So at the end of the day, if you create an efficient supply chain, if you create a back end which is efficient, if you put your drugs into the generic stream and you work with high quality minded investors, deliverers, and the supply chain, it's easily doable. So yes, you need the US and the Europe market because that juices it up. And especially I'm talking about pharma. It juices it up. But we still fundamentally believe that the market is sitting here in Asia. And just because if we can deliver the volumes over here, we should be able to make maybe not as exciting margins that you could make by selling your drug in the US, but there's enough volume to be made here. That's our fundamental.
No, actually, if Dr. Verma, if I look at the companies which are catering to the US market and India versus companies that are catering only to the Indian market, I think the last 5 years have shown that the companies catering only to India have actually made better returns and less volatile returns. I mean the return on capital and less volatile as compared to because of the generic status out there and no branding out there versus India. So can I actually develop on each of these subjects one by one? What about pharma manufacturing? I mean, the last 6 months, everybody calls about how Indian companies would be. I mean, they're always the manufacturing shop floor of the world in pharma, so to say. And they've gained more prominence, less interference from the US FDA, etc. And therefore, a lot of people believe that this is the resurgence of Indian pharma after the fall that came in post 2015. What's your sense on pharma manufacturing? Can we dwell upon that for a bit? APIs, generic players, specialist players, what have you?
We are big fans of specialization. Our belief is that Indian pharma has now gone far away from the copycat, make massive volumes, drop the price strategy to actually get into the higher specialized space. One of our investee companies, Concord Biotech in Ahmedabad, is the world's largest producer of transplant medication. They make APIs. Now, that's the level of specialization we're talking about. I clearly believe that in the next couple of years, and we're already beginning to see this, that you will have Indian pharma players who are on the upper end of specialization, catering to niche markets, niche products. So they won't have a portfolio of 100 molecules. They'll have 10 molecules that they're damn good at, and they will be able to manufacture for the world. So there is no debate to my mind that clearly specialization is going to be key. I think the second big push is thanks to the situation with China, that there is a lot of push coming from the government and from us locally to reduce our dependence on the Chinese API. At this point of time, till all this had happened, everybody was just happy getting the product at a cheap price. And thanks to COVID, we've also learned that it makes sense to diversify your supply chain. So I think that's the second thing that will happen. What a lot of people don't talk about is India today has the largest FDA-approved pharma manufacturing base in the world. So we are getting pretty good at quality. And instead of just doing the typical Indian scenario of saying world-class without meaning it, we are actually now putting money where their mouth is. Because now no serious pharma manufacturer comes up with a new plant which is not of FDA standard. So we're not cutting corners anymore. And to me, I think the biggest transitional change we are beginning to see is how the promoters of Indian companies, especially the newer generation who are now, if we are going through a generational change, are stepping up to the plate and saying, wait a minute, dude, I don't want to compromise on quality. So I'm going to put more capex and money up front, but I want to make a world-class product. To me, that is the most heartening sign.
Okay. Couple of follow-ups there before we move on to the other spaces. The buzzword for the last 9 months, or at least 6 months, has been APIs. Now, do you reckon that the growth curve out there, because of China plus one, or because of just the quantum of demand that will come in and the upping of expertise that Indian manufacturers have had, that the growth curve is fairly long and fairly large for the next few years?
No,
I'm just wondering if the juice is already behind, or do you reckon that the growth path is still very large?
There is no debate that we are at the cusp of a growth. And the reason for that is very simple. API has always been non-sexy. People have been running after formulations. Our belief when we started off 5-7 years ago is that we still believe API, specialized API, has a long way to go. I think the formulation game is going to get more complicated because they are going to be higher quality API guys supplying to the same formulators. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned to you, the market is so large that for the next 5 to 10 years, I see API enjoying a good run. The reason you see the craziness in valuations right now in pharma is that there's a lot of money chasing very few high quality targets. That's where it is. I hope that as this trend continues and people understand that good quality money will always chase good quality assets, we'll start to see more and more of these in the market. But there's no debate that API will still continue a good run.
Okay. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when I looked at your portfolio of companies, at least on the website, it seemed that um, to me that a larger proportion of your investments, I don't know the quantum of investments, but just the number of companies that you've gone in, a larger number of the investments that you made is not in the pharma manufacturing space, but healthcare as a space and service. Is that so? And if so, why?
We divide, everybody has their own definition of healthcare, so let me give you ours. We divide our investments into 4 sectors. The first one is healthcare delivery, which is basically hospitals and diagnostics. The second is pharma, and I've shown you my clear bias for API. The third is medtech and consumables. And the fourth is what we fondly call the retail healthcare space. So things like healthcare at home, dialysis clinics, diabetes clinics, consumer facing. 40%, I would say 35% of our money goes into delivery, 35% of our money goes into pharma, and the remaining 30% goes into the other 2 sectors. That's how it is split. This is a reflection of quality of companies. We're a growth private equity firm. So this is the quality of assets that are available over there. We don't go out with a bias saying, I want to invest 40% in delivery. That's what we see. But as you see our trend as we go forward, you will start to see more and more money go into other subsectors such as healthcare financing, other sectors when it looks at digitization and automation. Right now, unfortunately, because of the scale and size of our fund, there is a minimum ticket size and there are very few companies which meet that criteria. But that's how we look at healthcare.
But you are diversified because it's good to diversify, or you diversified also because you believe that the growth paths across most of these are almost homogeneous? Or would you reckon that in some pockets, the quantum of growth could be substantially higher than others? But of course, because people have to diversify, people also diversify because it's just prudence.
Fair question. As a private equity investor, my bottom line is my return. All right. So at the end of the day, my investors don't care whether I made money by doing it in digitization or setting up a new hospital.
Sure.
The reason we like to diversify is that the whole healthcare ecosystem is actually linked at the back. So take for example, a diagnostic chain. If I have a diagnostic chain and I have a hospital, first I marry the two so that the labs can do the hospital stuff. And then I'm able to take the diagnostic chain to the retail space, which starts to then source patients there. If you have an integrated system, then you can make the front and the back work, and it is synergistic to the business. I think also what happens is that if you're able to marry different diversified subsectors of healthcare, you can start looking at supply chain issues, buying benefits, cost efficiencies, and bringing all of those on a platform. Because going forward, the name of the game is data. How much data do you generate? How do you analyze it? And what you do with it? To me, one of the trends which is going to become the biggest theme of the 2020s as we go forward is digital data, especially in healthcare, because we have such a scarcity of it. I'll throw out a question, and I do it all the time. 1.3 billion people, how many diabetics do we think we have in India? If I say 200 million to 800 million, we could both be right. And that's scary. At the end of the day, if I am trying to make a policy on diabetes in this country, I don't even know whether I'm dealing with 50 million or 500 million. That's insane. So what we do need, and I'm a big proponent of data sharing now, it shouldn't be my data. It should be a common source data. And that's why I want to go on a national platform, is that all of us should benefit for the data we put out, because it's going to benefit the business as a whole.
And probably the system at large too. And you're right. I mean, this could actually be good for the patients in a meaningful way too.
Neeraj, one of the things, sorry, just to add on to that, one of the things that we do very poorly in this country is that we don't look at outcomes. We don't follow long-term data. I find it fascinating for the amount of debate that's going on vaccine safety right now. Vaccine safety will get established 2 to 3 years down the line. Nobody has the time for that. Now, if we had a robust system of tracking outcomes, these hospitals do this procedure better than the others, this is the kind of patients that they treat. Think of the amount of efficiency we could bring into the system. There's just so much to be done.
There's a lot, by the way, just offshoot, there's a lot of debate about whether a vaccine developed in such a short period of time is safe to take, etc. or no. I don't know if you have an informed opinion here, but if you do, would you be able to share?
Yeah, and so this is with my doctor's hat on. So this does not have the investor hat on. I'm quite clear on this. I have a firm belief in the institutions that are making and producing the vaccine. I think that they do have the right thinking towards it. Now, quite honestly, vaccine development, vaccine efficacy, and vaccine safety is a multi-year task. It's not something that you can fast forward. Having said that, if I have an option, and I was having this discussion yesterday, of me getting COVID or getting a vaccine which may be 50 to 90% efficacious, I'll take it in a heartbeat. Every single vaccine will have a one in a million chance of having some kind of an allergic reaction. That's life. I mean, do you want thousands of people dying every day? Or do you want to give them a shot at something that may work? I am on the side of optimism. I'll go the side of taking the vaccine.
Couple of questions, and before we wrap up. One, what's the risk of not government interference, but intervention? Let me put it that way, to product pricing, etc. Because we've seen that come up time and again, and maybe in certain cases in a valid fashion, simply because a large populace of our country does not have the financial wherewithal or the insurance to be able to afford normal medication, and therefore we've seen that happen in diagnostics, etc., pricing for COVID and otherwise in some other cases as well. What's the risk, business risk, to any of the segments because of this particular piece?
I think the government, as time has gone along, if you'd asked me the same question about 10, 15 years ago, my answer would have been very different, because at that point of time, there seemed to be a lot more tendency to do what is right for the universal population. I think as time has gone along, the government has realized that they will not be able to provide universal healthcare, and they will need to involve the private healthcare system meaningfully, which means that there is a rational approach to how much the government would want to interfere. Now, obviously, if I'm at the receiving end of a price cap, I'll always scream murder, because that's not something that I'd like to get. But having said that, I think there is a lot of dialogue now between the private and the regulators, by which they would not do something which is completely off limits. That's point one. Point two, I think it behooves us in the private sector to also define what is reasonable profit. And let's also agree on what we think. So to our mind, that is also very important. That's why I keep bringing up this whole thing about constant dialogue between the private and public sector, to be able to explain why we believe that if you want to deliver a quality care or a quality drug, that is the kind of margin that should be considered to be reasonable. And third, this is a country which has almost 1 billion smartphones, but we only have 500 toilets. So why can't we start using the smartphones to improve the quality of healthcare, which will bring down cost on its own? A lot of cost that is sitting in our system today is because of inefficiency and lack of data. I truly believe that if we can address these three, to answer your question directly, do I see a threat and price caps and people going crazy about bringing down numbers? The answer is no. There will always be intervention by the regulator to try and rationalize cost, which we saw with COVID testing. Is 800 the right price? Probably not. Was 3,000 the right price? No. So it's a give and take on both sides.
Got it. There are a few nascent spaces in India which have seen proof of time in the Western world. Where do you see fairly large opportunities emerging in the healthcare space in India, where maybe the private sector is already tapping it? I mean, senior living could be considered one, and we have maybe an entity or two which is listed as well. But where do you see newer opportunities which are not pharma manufacturing or diagnostics or something beyond that?
If you see where money is going in the West, it's mainly into newer therapies like biologics, a lot of money going into immunotherapy, a lot of money going into digital analytics and artificial intelligence, and a lot of money going into improving the back end efficiencies. To my mind, whatever we do in India is on a fast forward. If it takes 10 years in the West for something to evolve, we do it in the next 3 to 4 years. To me, these are the new areas. I think the era of building monolithic hospitals, 1,000-bed hospitals, or building new manufacturing capabilities is over. What is going to happen is that use the same infrastructure but do it far more efficiently. So, for example, when I look at a hospital, the way we run our hospitals, we do not believe that we'll keep throwing out capex building new beds. What we look at is how efficiently we use the beds. What do we do on that bed? How do we improve the throughput of patients by looking at average length of stay? Those are the kind of things which will become far more important as we go through. And rather than just doing the usual debate around mouthing the words artificial intelligence, we'll have to turn around and say, okay, this is what artificial intelligence does. So to give you a live example, the biggest constraint right now that we have in hospitals is finding enough radiologists. If I run 100 CT scans, how do I find radiologists to run it? If I have artificial intelligence which can scan the CTs for me, pick out the ones which are looking abnormal, only send those 10, 15 to my radiologist, the throughput of my radiologist improved tremendously. I just need a technician in the rural area to do a CT scan, send the image to me at a centralized station, and I can take care of it. That's the kind of revolution that we are going to see.
Are other hospital chains not doing that?
Not yet in a meaningful way. A lot of people are doing it anecdotally. A lot of people are improving. HCG Hospital, for example, runs a centralized command center where they can get the CT scans of cancer patients from other hospitals, bring it in. But I'm now talking about 100 HCGs in this country before you start to make a meaningful impact. And again, the public-private partnership of being able to take scans from district hospitals and bring them to a team of experts wherever they're sitting, so that you can provide care back there, is what's going to be important. Don't expect those poor district patients to come all the way into a Bangalore or a Bombay to get treated.
Okay, last question, and that is coming from, actually I'm borrowing it from somebody who's an investor who believes that this is an opportunity. I just wanted your thought here. The said gentleman told me that contract research in India is at a space that IT was maybe 20 years ago, because the Western pharma companies will have to outsource this. And once one large company does that to India, by virtue of the contraction in cost that that company would have, and therefore the expansion in margins, others would have to follow suit. And India is probably the best placed one because of the constant influx of skilled personnel that we dish out every year in this space. Any thoughts? It's again a very nascent space, maybe one large listed entity, very few other smaller ones. Any thoughts here?
So two things: you need to connect me with the gentleman because our thoughts match completely. I do believe that this is a space which is going to grow. The reason it hadn't grown so far is that we in India hadn't been able to convince the global majors that we can actually do a good quality ethical job on this. And there were some nascent steps that were taken about 10 years ago where we messed it up by taking shortcuts. I clearly believe that this is a great opportunity, and this is something that will grow and something that we look at very seriously.
Well, post the interview, I'll send an email connecting the two of you as well.
Please do.
One last thing, any advice for almost any of us between age 20 to 50, some simple things that people should do to ensure that chronic diseases don't hit us very badly?
A couple of quick things which I always tell my friends is the following. Number one, please sign up for health insurance. The cost of healthcare is going to go up regardless of whatever you do. Number two, please plan on your birthday getting a comprehensive health check done. The number of times that something anecdotally has been picked up, the sooner you pick it up, the better it is. The third, massive focus now on good quality nutrition and exercise. Those are very, very important. So your emotional, physical well-being, and making sure that you get predictive testing done well in advance. We've gotten very good at it in science, so we can pick up a lot of things. And lastly, make sure that you do not underestimate the cost of healthcare over the next 10, 15 years.
All prudent things, and all of them help from an investing or a financing planning perspective as well. So thank you for those. But this was lovely talking to you, Dr. Varma. Thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us today.
Neeraj, appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be in touch as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for talking to us. And viewers, thanks for tuning into this edition of The Talking Point.
Bye-bye.